Hey there. If you're a comic fan like me, then you probably have collected either some trade paperbacks or you've gotten some collections along the way, some reprints. And if you've seen reprints, then you probably saw them in either the Showcase Presents, like the Secrets of Sinister House one, or the Marvel Essentials, which have recently changed to Marvel Max. The Captain America ones, for instance, is the one of the Marvel Max. I have a few of these. Or the Dark Horse collection of the old Savage Sword of Conan tales, which I swear by. Or even the old color versions, like the Marvel Masterworks, which are a hell of a lot more expensive. But you grew up, if you were lucky enough to be a kid in the 80s, then you got your reprints in a much cheaper and a much better way. And how basically? Well, from around the late 70s to about 1985, DC used to run a series of reprints, and they ran them in a special way that are really cool. So if you're younger and you haven't seen these are pretty awesome, because most people only see this type of stuff when it's Archie or something like that. And there's a reason for that, which I'll get into in a minute. But DC did a series of digests. Actually, they did two series of digests. They did ones that were called the Blue Ribbon Digest, and they did kind of a best of Blue Ribbon Digest. And basically, what it is, let me make sure I get that right there. But they did two forms of Blue Ribbon Digest. You get a lot of reprints. Actually, it'd be about 100 pages of like reprints. Sometimes they put a little bit of new stuff in there, and a lot of times, even if you had stuff, you'd get some of this for various reasons. And I'll show you why in a second. I'm going to show you some of the digests. They also did their adventure comics in a digest like that. So they run it at 100 pages, and like this one here is one of the adventure comics. And the stories you got in it were actually pretty cool, unique stuff. This one had the Spectre, Black Canary, the original Sandman, Aquaman, and of course the Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes storyline. And what was really cool is you'd get some really great artists working on this stuff. This one here, I think, is it's kind of a dual cover, but I think it's done by actually Keith Giffen, who many of you guys should know. If you don't know who Keith Giffen is, Google it. Think Lobo. But there's some really cool stuff. I mean, fantastic art and writing in there. We got a Shazam story by E. Nelson Bridwell, and I think the art was pretty freaking incredible for back then. And way more than some more polished stuff that's done nowadays. The Aquaman story, for instance, was done by Jim Aparo, who, if you are a fan of comic art, the 70s, especially the late 1970s, Jim Aparo was pretty much the go-to guy for DC art. The next one I got was the Superboy one, and Nine Boyhood Adventures of Superboy. That was a really cool one. I love the way the covers are done. The art and these are pretty fantastic. Some pretty cheesy, cool early storylines in here as well. You get to see, of course, Lex as a young teen, and Lex as the modern Lex of that time. Supergirl, and well, she hasn't changed a lot. And Superboy and Superman. And there's actually some hilarious stories in here. The cover for this one is done by Ross Andru and Dick Giordano, who worked on a few of these, actually. There's even one at an Alex Toth cover. If you are familiar with the 80s and late in the 70s animation, Alex Toth's a name that you're probably very familiar with. Next up was, what I got is Superman versus Luthor. And this has some pretty cool stories. I gotta say, I really dig the look of Luthor back then. Much more threatening, actiony look than you would have later on. And Luthor is pretty much, again, Ross Andru and Dick Giordano cover, and it's fantastic. If you could look on the cover on here, and these all ran for like about 95 cents at 100 pages each. And honestly, can you think of any comic that's going to give you 100 pages for 95 cents right now? Next up is one that I really treasure, because it has some very cool stuff in it. And the cover on this one is by Giffen and DeCarlo, and it's pretty awesome stuff. And it's Secret Origins of Legion of Superheroes. I was a big Legion of Superheroes fan growing up, and some supervillains too. And as you can see, it's a wraparound cover. You know, you've got the Infinite Man, Timberwolf, Wildfire's original origin. The cool thing about the Wildfire origin actually is that he dies. Yes, if you're familiar with the Legion of Superheroes, this classic character looks a little different in his original basically, his character actually sacrifices his life in this issue before later on coming back to be a full-time member. And I myself have to Google again how exactly that happened. But one of the most famous covers done for the digest is one that I'm lucky enough to have, and it's a Hannigan Giordano one. And it's Superman versus Kryptonite. That was all stories based on Kryptonite. And this is probably one of the most famous covers for the DC Digest. I really love the way Superman's just like draped around the green kryptonite there. It's spelled out in the rocks. And you got like kind of like the white, assumably white kryptonite in back, which we is actually in here. On the back of this, of course, they give us the descriptions of each of the different forms of kryptonite. And again, you know, this is 95 cents for 100 pages. Actually, at this point, this was later in the digest, and it got up to $1.25, $1.50. And in Canada, it's $1.25 for you stateside guys. And this was about 1983, so this was 2 years before the digest would go out. This would be the first place that a lot of people would see some of this stuff. See some of this older art, because you got to remember, a lot of these older stories, they weren't being, they didn't have things like essentials or showcases. This wasn't around to go buy 500 pages of Superman for like $20 or something like that, or $10 in some places. You got this, and these were not easy to find, and especially in my area. So it was like finding a needle in a haystack, and you were one popular kid in school when you brought one of these to school. I don't know how many I lost by bringing these to school, having them swiped at me. But they ran until about 1985. I think I used to do a lot of these best of DC stories. So a lot of people, a lot of kids who probably hadn't seen Alan Moore's Swamp Thing before, probably actually saw their first Swamp Thing story in one of these digests here, because that comic wasn't always readily available in every store. You got to remember, this is before a lot of the comic shops came around and become like a staple the way that they are today. They did try to relaunch these about in the early 2000s. They did a few of them and didn't seem to work out as well, unfortunately. But I've always been a big fan of these digests, and so let me know if you guys have any of these. These are the 5 that I found recently at a flea market. Recently, about a year ago, to be honest with you. Every time I see some of these, I like to pick them up, because these are the only ones I got, and these are my childhood. I spent I don't know how many days daydreaming and reading and rereading these things until they were dog-eared. And honestly, every one of these here, since I bought these a year ago, have been read multiple times. I don't always have the time or to go grab out a big, bulky thing, but I can always grab a digest pretty easily if I'm going out somewhere, or if it's just very compact, very compatible. These are things from my childhood that I love so much. I love my showcase, I love my essentials, I love my reprint stuff, but my heart will always be with the DC Blue Ribbon Digest. They're my favorite. And let me know what your comic experience, what you read. Did you read the digest? Did you get some of the Marvel Treasuries, or some of the like DC Treasuries before they kind of like junked that and went up to the digest format? Do you even know what the digests are? Did you get them over in England, guys? And for me right now, I wanted to do something different. I want to talk about my geeky comic stuff. Hope you enjoyed it, and it's time for tea.